Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCullum, and today I want to talk about the Army's M7 program for a few minutes. I recently had the chance to watch Cappy Army's video where he had a chance to take out one of SIG's new M7A1 rifles and do some shooting with it, and that was very interesting. It's a good video. I'll link to it in the description text below. Definitely check it out if you're interested in this program. It's very interesting to watch. I have thought from the very beginning that this program was a bad idea. That said, I'm very skeptical that the US would actually adopt at this point a new caliber or even a new rifle to replace the M16. I really didn't expect that the US Army would adopt anything from the NGSW program. We do have a long history of doing weapons development trials, looking at all the options and adopting nothing new. And that's what I thought would happen here. Obviously, it didn't. Now, at this point, there are two separate things that a lot of people are conflating. One of them is the actual SIG rifle, the M7 rifle that SIG is producing for the Army. And there are some reports of issues with those rifles when they arrive to troops and issues with them in service. And I don't know anything about that. I had a chance to do some shooting with a civilian 6.8x51 or 277 Fury Spear rifle, the civilian version of the M7 several years ago. It was a good rifle. Like as a technical thing, it worked well, it handled well, but that doesn't mean that it's a good idea for the military to adopt it. And of course, that one early production rifle doesn't necessarily say much about mass production current issue M7s. So this video isn't about the rifle itself. It's about the doctrine and the concept behind its adoption, which is the part that I think is a really bad idea. So there were two main justifications that are typically given for the decision to get rid of the intermediate light recoiling high capacity cartridge, the 5.56, and replace it with a much higher pressure, much heavier recoiling, much physically larger and physically heavier cartridge, the 6.8x51. Those two reasons. The first one is when we were in Afghanistan, US troops were often taken under fire by enemy forces from ranges at which they could not effectively respond with their little wimpy 5.56 M4s. And that's very true. Something like 50% of combat engagements in Afghanistan took place in excess of the practical engagement range of the M4. Your typical situation would be, you know, a Taliban guy up in a hill somewhere in a hole. He's watered down the area around so he doesn't kick up dust with his muzzle blast, and he sets out a PKM and just starts dumping some ammo on a group of American Humvees out on patrol. Something like that, from like 800 or 1,000 meters away. And, you know, troops bail out of the Humvee, but what can they do? You can't see where the guy is. What do you do? And so the justification is often given that if we had some big honkin' rifle with a magnified optic on it that could reach out to 800 yards, well then, by gosh, we could have taken that dude out. Something like this thing. This is my pseudo-civilian M7. It's an Ohio Ordnance H-car in 30-06 with a big long barrel instead of the M7's little dinky short barrel. But honestly, it's a fun rifle to shoot. And I think it kind of fills the role of the M7 disturbingly well. Anyway, so the justification is we need a big heavy cartridge. We need to extend the infantry's rifle engagement range so that we don't get caught in a situation like that in Afghanistan again. And my counter to that is that the world has changed since we were fighting in Afghanistan. Like in combat terms, it's changed a lot. And I don't mean we're unlikely to get into a war in that kind of terrain again, although I think we're unlikely to get into a war in that kind of terrain again. But if that were happening today, you know what the answer would be? It's not rearm everybody in the Humvee. It's you have a box of a couple of little one-way attack drones sitting in the Humvee. They're little DJI things. They're this big. And okay, Taliban guy starts, dumping PK belts on the Humvee. Okay, you bail out, you find some cover, you toss a drone up in the air, you fly it 1,000 meters to wherever he's hiding in a hole, and kaboom. We've all seen the drone footage from Ukraine. Like, that's exactly what would happen if we were in Afghanistan dealing with that situation today. There's no need for a new small arm to do it, and it's so totally counterproductive to make all the sacrifices of going back to a full power battle rifle in order to be able to do what you can do more effectively with a, I don't know, a couple $1,000 military procurement one-way attack drone. So that was one justification, is long-range engagement with a dude hiding in a hole. Second justification was armor penetrating capability. Like, our potential near-peer allies are developing really good next-generation body armor, and we need our infantry weapons to be able to defeat that body armor. And I think this is also a mistake, or I think the adoption of the M7 is not the ideal solution to that problem either. So armor penetration is not solely a matter of pressure. Like, the thing with the M7 is, if you assume that it's designed for armor penetration, and from what I've heard, it pretty much was, like, that was one of the primary end goals that the M7 was built backwards off of, you need to have a properly constructed bullet traveling at high velocity, because velocity is a very important element in armor penetration. But they also wanted to keep the rifle relatively short and handy for troops, which means the barrel has to be short because you're going to put a suppressor on it. That's an important element in modern military small arm. So this is how we end up with a 13-inch barrel that has to achieve 30-something hundred feet per second, which means you have to jack the pressure, the chamber pressure of the cartridge, way up in order to get a high velocity, 140 or 130 grain bullet at 3,000 plus FPS. Now we have an 80,000 PSI cartridge. And interestingly, looking at Cappy Army's video, in order to try and mitigate the weight issue, SIG's M7A1 actually cuts the barrel down even shorter to 11 inches. And the SIG rep that they had in that video was talking about potentially upping chamber pressures to 125,000 PSI, which I'm willing to acknowledge maybe that's a typo, maybe that's a misspeaking thing. That, to me, that's just mind-bogglingly insane. Like, at that sort of pressures, your barrel life is going to be abysmal, your parts life and everything is going to be abysmal. Like, that's not a really good compromise to achieve higher velocity, especially when, instead of just working on velocity, there are capabilities out there for armor penetration that are much more focused on bullet construction and don't need to have necessarily the sort of super hyper velocity that you get out of an 80,000 PSI cartridge. I recently had the chance to visit CBJ in Sweden, and they have an amazing, the 6.5 CBJ cartridge is a pistol caliber cartridge that uses some velocity, but also a lot of material science and projectile design to create a remarkably effective, like, to many people, a shockingly effective armor penetrating cartridge without having to do a whole lot. Like, they do it in the chamber pressures of 9x19 Parabellum. If you took the guys from CBJ and you told them, right, here's a DoD contract, we need you to come up with an armor piercing loading for standard 5.56 carbines that will go through whatever they want to get, whatever they want to be able to defeat with the M7, with the 6.8x51, give that standard to the guys at CBJ, tell them they're going to be doing it out of a 14.5-inch barreled M4 carbine with a 223 chamber, and I'm willing to bet that they can do it. They've got 30 years of expertise developing, designing the small details that make so much difference on a project like this. And that ammunition, by the way, is always going to be incredibly painfully expensive. Because it's going to be hard to get good economy of scale on it. There's a lot of finicky detail that goes into the assembly and construction of every individual cartridge, much more than modern, just typical, hardened steel penetrator core in a jacketed lead bullet. But you know what else costs a lot of money? Adopting an entirely new rifle program and replacing all of your ammunition in inventory and also all of your support machine guns, and developing this whole two new weapons families from scratch that they're always going to have problems. Like, there's no slight on SIG in this case. Every new military weapon out there has some sort of whoopsie, we messed that up and we had to recall a bunch of guns and fix them. Like, everyone in history always has it. It's going to happen on the M7 if it's not already. It's going to happen on the M249 or the M250s if it hasn't already. Like, all that's incredibly expensive, and I don't think actually necessary for the goal of armor, being able to defeat significant good armor. And if you do it with, if you put a tenth that amount of money into development of a 5.56 armor penetrating cartridge, you now have the ability to issue that really fancy expensive ammo when it's necessary, or standard 5.56 ball and retain all of the benefits that we already have in 5.56 carbines. The ammo capacity, the weight benefits, all of it. So there are a couple more things that I want to touch on here. So this is not the first time that we have adopted a cool new rifle that's intended to increase soldier efficiency and capacity. And in this case, part of the idea is to extend the soldier's effective range. This is the Afghanistan part of the original justification. And my concern with that is every time the US has gone into a war, they've ended up in the aftermath doing some research and trying to figure out what worked and what didn't. And they look at what's the effective range of an infantryman with a rifle. And the answer that pretty much always comes back is 100 to 300 meters. At 100 meters, infantry are really good at hitting stuff with rifles. At 200 meters, they're reaching their effective limit. And at 300 meters, it's really rare that anyone's doing anything very effective. And this is for two reasons. One of them is just straight up marksmanship. And one of them is being able to see a target. Let me get my notes here for just a moment. In the aftermath of the Korean War, the US Army and some of the other NATO armies did this sort of study. There was one in particular, 18,000 sites surveyed across Canada, France, Germany, North Africa, and Korea, looking at what distance could a prone rifleman actually see a 5-foot tall standing person? And the answer was, in 70% of cases, 300 meters was the maximum range that you could actually see a person standing up. So when you consider all of the compromises that go into, and the expenses that go into trying to generate a rifle that can give an infantryman a 600-meter effective reach out and touch that guy range, well, 70% of the time, it's a total waste because the dude could be standing upright and walking around slowly with no idea he's under observation, but he's not under observation because you can't actually see someone 300 meters away when you're prone. We see the exact same data come back from World War II studies. And this is assuming, like, these are assuming some of the best case situations. You're talking about some of these sites in North Africa where you have very long open areas, places not that different from Afghanistan. You look at a lot of expected combat zones today, and you're going to have something more like, say, Bougainville. There was a study the US did on combat effectiveness in the Bougainville theater in World War II, and the conclusion there was that virtually all rifle fire, all that actually hit anything, was conducted at less than 75 yards because it's a jungle. And what do you want with a 600-yard effective range when you're in the middle of a jungle and you like almost never see anyone beyond 75 yards at the most? So the second element, so first off, it's very unlikely that you will see an opponent beyond 200 to 300 yards or meters. And by the way, all of those studies are based on standing people. When they're going out and actually assessing sites and saying, how far away can we see a target? The target is a dude standing up straight. Go look at footage from Ukraine and tell me how often are guys just standing up straight in the middle of nowhere. And the only time you see it is, you know, if you surprise someone with a drone when they don't expect there to be a drone and they're trying to get from point A to point B. Guys who are in combat positions do not just stand up and walk around. They do their best to hide and not be spotted. And so when you want your actual range at which you can spot targets, it's not qualification range where it's a pop-up silhouette that just sits there at full height and says hello. It's a dude who's doing his absolute level best to not be spotted. So because of that, the practicality of very long-range infantry small arms is really dubious in the first place. You got your snipers who are out there, frankly, shooting people who don't realize that they're in danger of being shot from extended range, and so they do not try to necessarily hide all the time. The second part of this problem is marksmanship. In general, Army marksmanship just kind of peters out at the 200 to 300 meter range. Once you get out to 500 meters, even expert rifle shots tend to be not particularly effective in any sort of quasi-realistic combat scenario. And compromising a lot of the other capabilities of an infantry small arm in order to attempt to give the infantry a rifle that is effective at 500 meters, in my opinion, is a waste of time, and it's a really bad choice, because most of those infantry cannot make any sort of practical effective use of that capability at 500 meters. They can do it to 200, the really good ones can do it to 300, and that's where it falls apart for reasons of you can't see a target, the target is fleeting, the target's moving, the target's only showing you a little small part of a target, and accuracy is just really hard at that range. I think rather than try to brute force your way through extending infantry rifle range with a bunch of technology and expensive new guns that frankly compromise a lot of short range efficacy, it would be much better to maximize the effectiveness of the rifle within the operational envelope that we know they're really good in. Take a rifle and optimize it for 1 to 200 yards and like go with that, embrace that, and then accept that you're going to need other options for longer shots. And if you want that other option to be marksmanship, there is absolutely a place for the designated marksman in every modern military. Take that guy, you can give him a more powerful cartridge, you give him a more powerful magnified optic, you give him a rifle that is deliberately compromised at short range in order to increase its capability at long range. You train that guy so that you take your best shooters and you put them in that position and give them extra training. You min-max that guy so that he can actually take some of those longer range shots. That's absolutely well worth it. But what's not well worth it is trying to turn everyone into the unit into that guy, and in the process, massively compromising their ability to maintain fire superiority because they run out of ammunition, compromising their ability for CQB because they're shooting much heavier recoiling weapons with smaller capacity magazines. So, in conclusion, thank you for coming to my TED Talk, I suppose. I don't know where the M7's going at this point. I think the Army's made its decision and they're probably going to stick with it. We have had small arms in U.S. Army service that lasted as few as 7 years as official standard issue arms before being replaced due to problems of various sorts. And perhaps the M7 will be the next of those. In my opinion, the sooner they reverse course on this, the better. If they decide to cut off procurement and keep the M7 as sort of a specialized weapon for specialized utilization, special purposes, great. You can save face that way and just don't take away everyone else's M4s. Anyway, I don't know. We'll see what happens. That's all I got. Thanks for watching. Oh, psych! That's not actually all I've got, because I've got a bunch of fantastic books here that you might be interested in. If you're looking at battle rifles, well, maybe you want something on the actual Cold War NATO battle rifles, all of the other battle rifles that have been out there that might compare to the M7. Or if you want to see arms development programs, what the United States and what the Soviet Union built up during World War II, everything from what we started with at the very beginning to what we had at the very end. There's a tremendous development program there, and we cover it in our World War II series. Currently, we have the US story covered and the Soviet Union covered. Then, perhaps if you want something that is a little more hardcore tech nerdery, we have a variety of other books. We have, for example, Jonathan Ferguson of the British Royal Armouries, his book Thornycroft SA-80 on British bullpup rifles, including the EM2 battle rifle in there. We have my very first book, Chassepot to FAMAS, on French military rifles, including, of course, the MAS semi-auto battle rifle series. And if you just want weird, goofy stuff that makes no sense and is tremendously entertaining to look at, Pistols of the Warlords, Chinese domestic handguns from the Warlord era, 1911 to 1949. All sorts of bizarre, cool stuff in there. Anyway, everything here is available and shipping at headstamppublishing.com. it is not too late to have something delivered in time for Christmas. So check it out. I have a link to our website in the description text below. Merry Christmas.